Turns out he's a major cinephile. They don't watch enough movies! It's a very simple formula! And here we go. Well, loyal or new listener, I know you are probably expecting the part 3 of my 4-part Marvel deep dive with the first half of Phase 3 next up to bat. But I've been toying around with an idea for a bit now for another slasher episode. I've been having some not amazing nightmares, not like fictitious, just like real-world horrors, the worst kind. And with the availability of all but one of these on HBO Max, the timing just made sense. So now behold the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise episode. It's upon us. I had no clue going into this if I would like any of these movies, be they too scary or too silly or just not my thing. If you want my initial take on my first introduction to Freddy Krueger, please take a listen to my Friday the 13th episode for a sneak peek. But I will briefly touch on Freddy vs. Jason here as well. And who knows, maybe after 7 movies, I will appreciate the Dream Demolisher just a bit more, with that being the 8th of 9 to come out chronologically. So try and not fall asleep after listening to this eerie installment of Knick Knack Goes to the Movies Back to Slasher Things. Ooh. A Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 1984. This franchise was just 4 years after the first Friday the 13th, and it came out 6 years after the first Halloween. Most movie reviews of mine start off with some cast stuff. I can't say I'm super familiar with most of these people in these franchises. Robert Englund is pretty much known for his role as the titular slasher, and with the more out there personality of Freddy, you know him more so than the silent Michael or Jason actors. So most, if not all, of these movies will not feature this actor element, and they'll go right into the meat of the movie content. But this first movie does have a super young Johnny Depp, like Halloween with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Friday the 13th with Kevin Bacon. Most horror movie franchises have at least one super well-known actor mixed in there somewhere who grew to prominence after their one-and-done slash role, and this franchise deeper on does have a few to keep your ears peeled for. My initial note is the first movie credits has introducing Johnny Depp and calls the series villain Fred Krueger. Wild stuff to start for the uninitiated such as myself. I'm sure at the time watching this movie without the knowledge of a dream killer, that intro must have been a huge mind, whoa, what's going on? It was a dream the whole time? ? That notion today is done a ton, especially in Nolan films. So you know it was mind-blowing in the 80s. Also, the dialogue is super 80s, and that is actually sensational for me. Young Johnny Depp channels his inner Ferris Bueller with a sound effects cassette to trick his mom about where he's staying. Early on in this movie, there's just a lot of fun going on. But if nothing else, this movie super reminds me of why I picked it up in the first place. The fear of knowing if you're dreaming or not. A guy living in the wall until you wake up. I love it at all. The tone is super creepy and scary, and the subterfuge angle is a bit more present. As someone who gets 5 to 6 hours of unsteady sleep, it feels like I'd be in fairly good shape in this movie. There is an added layer of fear to be had that Freddy kind of plays by his own rules and can run all over your dreams, and there's nothing you can do. In that first kill, he's playing with his food, so to speak, and seeing what it looks like on the outside, pulling in Exorcist and seeing this girl float too up all around them walls, bleeding all over the place. This movie is wild. The opening may not have gotten me, but this sure did. Wild first fatality in the film. Legally, when you think of who's to blame for the kills, it's super wild that there not being any real proof of Freddy killing in this first movie, in this first moment. And he immediately has a scapegoat. Not sure how much he can plan outside of a specific dreamer going on. And overall this franchise constantly was wondering the logistics of this killer and world, and I wanted to learn more about it. I don't know if we really ever got those answers, but I was really curious at this point in time of, oh wow, I can't wait to see how it all works. I mean, this goes without saying, though. This is, and I think I said it before, my first time watching any of these Nightmare solo movies. I wonder if Inception has not ruined Dream movies, because I love that movie, but I now look at all these Nightmare on Elm Street movies and wonder, like, how does Freddy make all these dreams within dreams and levels of the dream? How is it all possible? How does he populate all these people in them? Or what if people have weaponized dream defenses? I had so many questions about this franchise just flying a mile a minute, which were a little distracting to watching the movie. This whole notion of your dream starting in a realistic enough setting is pretty good for dream logic. I would love if someone could tell me if, like, this movie had any sort of consultants on this movie with, like, a psychology degree or experience. Like, those are the questions I need to know. I also wanted to know if Freddy could, like, split his attention to multiple dreams at once. It seems like that power kind of exists later on in the franchise. I don't know if it's really touched on a whole lot in this first movie. There's this whole bringing him out of dreams, bringing people into different dreams, combining the different dreams thing. It definitely gets touched on a lot more in the third movie when they start having Dream Squad, Dream Warriors, Dream Masters, and all the Dream Palooza people. I guess this is a sign of a good horror movie, is it leaves you asking a lot of questions, you know. Before it's obviously clear, you're wondering, how is he picking his targets? You know, how does he jump from person to person? Does someone have to see someone to be already infected with this, albeit call it Freddy disease? I mean, there's so many questions I ask, and I also got, like, this feels like an insurmountable battle at times. Like, you can only stay awake for so long with however many weird stay awake dream pills they try to come up with. With Halloween and Friday the 13th, you can mostly make it without going to, you know, one specific camp in New Jersey or one part of Illinois. I know Friday the 13th has no real orchestral soundtrack or theme to speak of. Halloween, however, has a lovely, catchy theme. One of the Friday the 13th had like an 80s synth version, but seemingly you can't find it anywhere on Spotify. But the super 80s scares music is in this movie. While it's not good, super funny and fits the theme very well of a little cheesy, a little spooky. It goes right on par with the Monster Mash. Overall, the scares in this movie are pretty good. The gore could literally not happen all the time with such a small cast, but the atmosphere, dreams, scares, and almost kills, it looks so good even if the body count isn't super high. And I'm pretty about the final girl played by Heather Langenkamp. She feels fairly fleshed out and developed, but knowing she's only in 3 movies total, one of those being, you know, different, which we'll get to, it's a bit disappointing knowing that either she's dying or they're just doing the Friday the 13th new final girl every single movie. This movie does try to toe into that dream research, you know, what's going on, is it a dream after all, kind of assess everything. And I like kind of that deep dive. For how little I sleep, this movie speaks to me on so many levels, and that's something that I'm genuinely interested in, is kind of that sleep stuff. I don't want to research it all, but let's watch movies about dreams, I guess. I mean, I wish I could sleep as much as some of these characters. You know, I wish I could, you know, figure out, you know, more about these mysterious dreams things. There's so much dream analysis stuff around in the world. It just seems fascinating. Bit of a tangent about dream logic, but there are just so many interesting characters all over this movie. Well, I love the random killings as the MO going into this movie. Having it all be based on killing the kids of the parents who killed Freddy when he was a super bad human non-dream kid killer, it adds some depth and rationale. But it also takes a bit of the fear away and pulls it right back with the other 80s slashers. Also, glad that the celeb who grew past this movie ended up lasting most of the movie, not just being a brief 10-minute cameo type role. And while we don't see his dream or real death, Johnny Depp getting pulled down into his bed to like a geyser of blood, like, OMG, that was insane and sensational. And if we're trying to pitch this movie to you, if you like Home Alone movies, the last third of this movie has all of the booby traps you could imagine but it's a little more hardcore. The end makes absolutely no sense. It's if everyone's dead or not dead, which I guess is the whole stupid top thing in Inception, which I don't necessarily love it, and I guess that's the whole MO of this thing. Was it all a dream? Is it never a dream? But at a point you want to know something that happened in this story of this franchise. Maybe they're all alive. Is this Freddy's dream? Is this Nancy's dream with the car being Freddy's sweater colored? I have more questions than I should have at the end of this movie. It's a fun but confusing time. I don't think I need to rewatch this, but I was definitely happy taking this first step into this nightmare. And if I took the first step into the nightmare, might as well take another one with the Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge from 1985. Previous amendment to how to avoid the Freddy nightmares, apparently. I know I touched on this in the first movie's bullet, but just to put it out there, I guess it should have been obvious from the title. Just don't live on Elm Street. That's how to avoid all this. Besides, don't be related to the parents who killed him in the first place. I guess that's it. But weirdly, this can't be like Crystal Lake. If so many people are moving and new people are moving into this house, why would they move to this street with all this bad history there? That clearly has to be accessible information. I know this is just like Friday the 13th, but having the first final girl that was never really super developed in that movie, you didn't really mind as much jumping from final girl to final girl. I will miss Nancy and Don Thompson. And overall, the first super fun cast. I mean, Nancy deserves to be in more than seemingly 3 of these movies. 2 as Nancy, 1 as the actress Heather Langenkamp. From that fake movie Real World 1 that's definitely vaguely reminiscent of the Scream Stab franchise dichotomy, which makes sense, being Wes Craven being the mind behind the first 1 to 2 of these and his later movie, and of course the Scream franchise. My first thing to note of this sequel second movie, besides how significantly less scary the first Nightmare is, it looks very bad. But I wish I could have done some archery in high school, like gym class. Don't get me wrong, handball was awesome, but as someone who was archery certified for a whole 3 years, feels like a missed fun opportunity that I didn't get to take part in. This movie decides to be less Elm Street based and just this one specific house on Elm Street. If all these murders happened in this one house and the immediate surrounding houses, why the heck would anyone move there? I know Google didn't become a searchable invention until 1998. Most of these movies came out well before that. But even news stories existed before that. And that feels like something they would have had to disclose to a previous owner or realtor. And if it were not the stereotypical bad, oblivious parent in slasher movies, you would say, okay, I guess thanks for showing the house or telling me about the house. I'm definitely not interested if some people were floating around and dying on houses on this street. Overall, this movie's pretty goofy. Some of the Freddy parts and our final boy, Jesse, overall, just kind of goofy. His dance cleaning up his room scene is clearly the most relatable moment in all of cinema. This is also one of the few movies that has that true final boy archetype, something that normally leads to this lead being a mirror of our killer, where the final girl is the polar opposite. The only ones I can think of outside of this is Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th, who definitely has that mirrored killer part for a bit, and it's literally impossible in the Final Destination series, but Alex is the final boy. They did weird things off camera to kill him when they decided not to go back to him for the sequel. It's a bit weird how different this movie is to the first one. Obviously, it keeps the similarities. Look, Freddy is haunting and making things happen. Normal on-par stuff for the franchise. But some things in this, just like a little too weird. Having a bird's attack and then spontaneously combust and blow up. Like melting records. I don't know what it is. I guess I like my long-standing tale all about one or a few main leads instead of a new lead every single time. Other than Scream, Most horror franchises try and delineate and try something new to mix it up. But why not just tell an awesome recurring story? Every Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis is just better overall compared to the others, no doubt. Experiments like Season of the Witch and that one-off Friday the 13th, they just aren't it. I feel like this is more random. There is this one sign, though, that it's a fact. Pot hurts. That's objectively hilarious. So, almost halfway through the movie, I feel like Jesse is a complex character. The first movie left us off with no real reason why Freddy needs to possess someone. Also, it's mad jarring that they still call him Fred Krueger and not Freddy. This is more wild than the subtle first movie. All these crazy house signs, like a toaster catching fire without being plugged in, or the bird exploding. There's so much of a reason to leave this place immediately, and his dad is that typical 80s movie dad, the most that could have ever existed. I mean, it doesn't make real world sense, but it makes sense, I guess, in the world of cinema. And I guess this is where Friday the 13th and Halloween, both those franchises almost went with Tommy Jarvis and Jamie Lloyd. Neither really went to being the big bad that they were built up to be, but this movie clearly went past that, and he's already doing the killings. Like, it clearly feels like that's the way they went. Also, while Lisa, the closest we have to a leading lady, is a bit uneven at times, overall, I like the strained relationship they have together about opening up and such. I mean, Nancy and Glenn is unmatched, but this pair is pretty fun, and overall, Jesse seemingly has the best shirts in every scene. And with summer right around the corner, that pool party house and that party scene overall looks like the best, most fun I've ever seen. That house is the dream. I mean, I don't love Jesse literally morphing into Freddy, but I love that sad, murdering death scene of him killing Ron. It's some wild stuff, and once again, early on in this movie, it plays with legal ramifications of Freddy getting someone else to take the blame for all these killings. But that is followed up with dumb things like hot dogs catching fire and popping off, and a bunch of brewskis leaking all over the place. I guess it's just confusing a bit how Fred Krueger, that will never sound right. He controls some dream powers outside of dreams, and he goes around biting people, something that really is never seen again until the rough end to the Wes Craven version later on. Like, you just get lost here. This end is wildly inconsistent, but hilariously chaotic. All the kids at this pool party clearly should have ganged up on Fred and ripped him a new one. The writing here is also wildly uneven. Maybe I'm just not used to a killer with attitude and this in-your-face personality. The most I'm used to, comparatively, maybe some of the different ghost faces. And add all this on top of having some weird-faced dogs, which will always remind me of the Coyotes, Harley Quinn, Joker Coyotes. This movie feels like a strange, semi-hardcore Joker-like movie, and way less of a Nightmare Living monster movie. From the turning into a clown with a dark humor, ending up at a chemical plant. In this movie, it's a boiler room. I mean, I still have to see if I like Joker as much as I think I did on the first theater viewing. Lastly, I guess if you had to say a premise or a moral of the story, is true love conquers all or something. I guess that's how they went with this one. It's not a bad movie, but the original is pretty good, and this one has some good ideas, but it also has some not so good ideas. I feel like I'd heard good things about the third movie in this franchise, Dream Warriors from 1987, before even starting this episode watch list idea. But the only thing I knew going into this third movie is somehow this was the only one that was not on HBO Max, and you had to pay for it to rent on Amazon Prime. Not good. But at least this is a true sequel with Nancy and Don Thompson from the first movie. But somehow, Jesse and Lisa can't be in this movie too. If you develop your characters, you can't just throw them away. Friday the 13th gets away with it because they don't even try to develop most of the characters, and most just people for Jason to kill. Sometimes, overall, this franchise just It's weird and gross. Not even like gore. It just does weird things and finds a way to make paper mache nauseating. I guess it's a bit weird of a thing overall, but still, I don't get it. I guess I haven't really talked about it a ton, but the creepy dead kids who are singing a little song, doing their jump roping, something from The Shining and It, and I'm sure many more. It's a neat idea. Freddy's dead victims, mostly if not all, are kids and teens, although the ones that are always shown are always the young kids from when we pre-met Freddy. The teens are never seen. Never understand that. I feel like this idea just never really got super utilized, more of a creepy thing that happens. And I just want it to be more utilized in this overall. This movie kicks off with a little more fun usage of it, but I just think overall the creepy kids thing just never really matters in any movies in this franchise, really. It's more just an ode to a thing that happened in the past. Speaking of old things, the cheesy oldies music is back, which is awesome for me. The scary music makes sense with the setting, but the cheddar oldies music is where it's at. And while I did think Johnny Depp was the most famous person initially in this franchise, I don't know if that's the case. It all depends how you rank it, but I do think Lawrence Fishburne is phenomenal, and he's in this movie as a medical assistant. You could tell immediately from his voice. And look, he's great in everything. He doesn't have a whole lot to do in this movie, and he is young here. And just random thing overall, I'm appalled that he's not going to be in the Matrix 4th because of some video game canonical death or something. And no Hugo Weaving. Not thrilled about those. But of course I'm going to watch it in theaters if possible. While some dream ideas are leaned into here, the whole psychology angle is super cool, and it makes sense. Clearly this movie uses the hospital setting better than any of those other movies before, Halloween and Friday the 13th. I guess the new way to make this all happen this time around is not normal dream killing by Freddy, and not boy possession, but instead making you kill yourself in your dreams. And if you die in your dreams or The Matrix or Inception, you die in real life. Obviously, thumb the rules. While I really like the direction of the first, I think this is weirdly a little closer to what I wanted, but maybe not as good as the first one. I will say the overall unease of this setting in dreams and the actual scares, it feels the best of all three movies of the first three. Although this continues this weird trend of Freddy as animals and creatures, which I'm not about. I do think Nancy as a dream nurse, it makes sense for her career path in regards to the first movie, which I love those connected stories. But missed opportunity, you totally could see Jesse from the second movie being in this hospital, having those dream issues, and this could be a fun way to bring all the leads together and unite those two for a nice third trilogy, and maybe they could have ended it here too. And having her, able to fight and come into other people's dreams, her first reuniting moment with Freddy, overall this stuff is super cool. But this franchise is known for being inconsistent, so can't be surprised when it happens. You got a Wallace and Gromit style bad rubbery animation of tiny Freddy with some amazing, wild, gory, and awesome moments of one of the patients being led by red, bloody strings coming out of his skin. Like he's being led like a marionette by Freddy to his death. The abstract nature is wild and horrifying. I don't know this is the whole point. You have to have 1 to 2 people in these movies in power who don't believe what's happening. And Dr. Elizabeth Sims is the default atypical non-believer, but somehow this movie never gives her comeuppance moment, which normally happens to the adult who says, oh, this isn't anything real that's happening. I feel like that's a missed opportunity. The biggest question going into this movie was, with what existed in the first movie, attacking kids who were related to the people who burned him. Second movie, because he lived in the house. But why was Freddy attacking these specific kids? They're clearly not located on Central Elm Street, and at the time, it didn't seem obvious that they had ancestors who killed him in a previous life. And look, that why is kind of important to me. And without a seemingly a rhyme or reason, especially when that cause existed in the first place, you definitely were a little confused. And look, overall, the kills in this movie are good. The scares are there, no doubt. But this could be the whole watching these after seeing the joke or the parody. Now I 100% know that the Rick and Morty Scary Terry quotes, they were actually a real franchise nightmare thing of just using the word bitch at the end of every quip. I figured that was like a joke. Apparently not, and that was just his MO. Not good. Bad. Funny, but not good. Also, I don't like scary nuns. I don't need them. I don't need them in my movies. I think that's something that's going to keep me away from the Conjuring movies. I know there's a new one coming out, but creepy nun in this movie, or any movie, not what I'm about. And in this one, she's some half-spirit thing. Either way, no good. Get that concept out of here. Don't want it, don't need it. And this is a stream of conscious movie review, but having that eventual reveal of these kids are also the kids who are related to the parent mob who killed Freddy at first. Apparently there's a lot of parents who were involved in this killing. Initially I thought I was like, this was a joke, like, oh, they can't also be related, but if there's any more kids related to the people who murdered him this many movies later, I think the joke was, I said, if the movie's 6 and there's still kids that are killing him from back then, I would be pissed. Like, at the moment though, with this movie, it feels like this is sort of the final hunt. And the real question, of course, which we'll answer later, is once he hunts down the final few kids, what does he do next? If he succeeds in his goal, now there could always say, well, Nancy could always keep kicking on and fighting him, but the assumption would be that would get boring after 6-7 movies too. And clearly they don't care enough about her as a lead because they just said nah in the second one, and clearly she's not around for a few more movies to boot after that. It took a while for this movie to talk about some of the positives of dreams and fighting Freddy in the dreamscape. And when it finally has this movie diving into some of those fun moments and wonders of dreams and the power of controlling your dreams, which is also one of those things that's based in some realism, there's something cool about that. And it feels like an idea that resonates with most people. It's a struggle to control your dreams. There's something about writing it down, and maybe that helps you do it. Look, sometimes these dreams are bad, sometimes they're good. It's a powerful notion, and I love that. It's a super exciting and enticing angle to take. And I guess when I did my actor speak, I didn't talk about Patricia Arquette, related to David Arquette, a star of the Scream franchise. But her role in this of Kristen Parker, the newer eventual replacement for Nancy Thompson, like, she's pretty good as this fill-in version. Obviously, I would have liked to have kept our OG final girl, but not what it was about, seemingly. Like, so many parts of this movie, gosh, it reads like Inception and The Matrix. There's a mashup trailer for the Inception of Elm Street. It's everything, and it makes sense. Weirdly, it finds a way to make it all line up. I'd be all about Leo, Tom Hardy, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt taking on Freddy in an action horror dream movie. You know, probably would be better than the other crossover Freddy's in. And I'll say this knowing now that I do not enjoy the modernist versions of this franchise. Just throwing that out there. But back to the movie at hand. The big dream set piece moment. You know, it has Matrix-style wall backflips, among other things. Beautiful, beautiful things that it has. Obviously, this came out prior to that movie, but still. There's something really cool about seeing everyone have to face their own special fears. I know not everyone is mad developed, but I feel like I care about all these characters. One thing this franchise has I will never get is why Freddy's knife fingers make this like bird cawing, screeching sound and not like metal on metal. Don't know why they went that route. Super annoying. Absolutely made no sense. Robert Englund, who plays Freddy, kind of different in every film, but I feel like overall, I think he's pretty strong in this movie. The first one feels more sinister in the shadows, sneaky, but I like this version we get here of kind of funny, but also pretty scary. if more open and talkative about it. But you know what's bad here? A super rubbery skeleton fight. Like this 1987 CGI is painfully bad. Something went super wrong here, especially since some of the special effects are good enough. Even sending people into mirrors looks bad, but I guess it took till 1996 for it to be perfected by Mario 64. Every one of these movies, I wonder what way Freddy will be defeated. Sometimes fire, sometimes holy water. It's a true mixed bag. I will end this one talking about how I wasn't super thrilled that Nancy had to die. Like Devon Sawa and Ali Larter dying in the Final Destination franchise, which they built up. I know Halloween has killed off Jamie Lee Curtis twice, once off camera so far. But still, killing off the lead in these movies, not good. I guess Game of Thrones can do it. But that's it. And man, it would have been amazing to see 8 seasons of sword slashing Sean Bean kicking ass and taking names. In summation, I'm pretty about this third movie here. Also, these movies do a pretty good job overall with their final scares in each film. So, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. We'll start off by talking about recasts. I'm pretty against them for the most part. I think Mark Ruffalo and Don Cheadle did good work in their Marvel roles, and I'm super curious what Mads Mikkelsen will bring to the world of Harry Potter. But when Nightmare on Elm Street 3 kills off the final girl, setting up Patricia Arquette to be the new lead, all to replace that character in this movie with Tuesday Night. At least we bring the remaining Dream kids from the previous movie, but somehow the doctor who helped end Freddy last time, Neil Gorman, is not back. The setup is a bit all over the place. Like there's some continuation from 1 and 3, somehow skipping 2, but all over the place in this one. I will say most of these movies start off with some fun enough non-orchestral 80s bop that has something to do with dreams or nightmares or sleeping. And I do quite like the oldies fun jams. And there's something fun about pulling everyone into everyone's dreams to keep the whole sleep squad safe. But I don't care about Tuesday Night. Also, overall, having all the Dream kids and a ton of zany new characters, like a martial arts kid. I mean, this feels way more like a Friday the 13th movie compared to anything this franchise has thrown at us. The dialogue overall, pretty cringy and goofy, and I do get it. Overall, the Friday the 13th movies, they're zany, goofy, and kind of bad as well. But there's some kind of charm involved there. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who looks into it. I don't know if I could just ever have the same love for this franchise. I don't know if I started too late like Jaws. Maybe I love the more masked silent type, with the wacky characters being the counselors or babysitters. The killer being wild and goofy and zany is less for me. Also, as far as great dogs who make it through the movie, the dog Jason, such a good dog. Hey, it's a great name for a character in a franchise I like too. Logic for coming back may not exist in this franchise, but normally there's some reason that the bad guy comes back. Seemingly, Freddy came back just because a dog named Jason peed on where he was buried. Dumb. Mad dumb. And you know what I say, a quote, it's normally not because it's a good quote. And having Freddy kill a kid on a waterbed saying, "How's this for a wet dream?" is painfully bad. They clearly wanted to start over with a new cast almost immediately in this movie, which is weird because they did the recast and they killed her off immediately for our leading girl from the previous film. While the dream settings were super fun and cool in the last movie, here, waterbed is a bit neat, but the rest of them are kind of bad. And Freddy being a sand shark with his claws and putting on shades and mix this all in with Tuesday's terrible acting, saying no as she's getting curb stomped into the sand. This movie was like 30 minutes in, and I was pretty over how dumb it was. I finished it for you loyal listeners, so what can I say except you're welcome. Like, this movie wasn't even hilariously dumb, it was just dumb. I also think Freddy's just kind of stupid in this one. Like, this is the Freddy I remember from Freddy vs. Jason, but that was maybe worse. I mean, we'll get to the list for some fun surprises as we go, but initially I thought nothing could top that Freddy vs. Jason movie for being terrible, especially with the final kill here. Freddy, like, backflips this girl into a furnace to kill, seemingly the last Elm Street kid. And they load up this cemetery super surprisingly quickly in this franchise, which is unique enough to see the carnage and this somewhat reverent moment, for any franchise, this is kind of surprising and in a good way. I guess once, the deep personal fight with Freddy and his ultimate revenge against the kids in Elm Street, not the parents apparently, you gotta wonder if he's just too scared to take on the parents, if their dreams are too strong for that. It could be some development thing. I don't know. You'd think that'd be the next thing, but instead his goals become pretty whatever of just killing more teens, seemingly because why not? I mean, which is pretty weird since his whole thing was killing kids, seemingly, and not teens. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. Speaking of things that get worse, some of these special effects, painfully, hilariously bad CGI. Like, it's come back with a vengeance in this movie. Sucking on a girl's face to take all the air out of her. They're making out like it's dumb. There's something fun with Alice kind of to blame, or Freddy making her think that with all of her friends being killed off in her dreams. No one is safe apparently now, except for all the adults. Like, it's a neat concept, but the execution is kind of bad at times. And, clearly they ran out of reasons for Freddy to kill. And now he just has to kill because killing. I guess overall the title of Dream Master, and that being a learned skill, it's all a bit stupid. I also expected real kung fu fighting to happen between Rick, who was seemingly the most unique fun kid in Freddy, like Julius and Jason boxing. Well, one-sided boxing until you got your head boxed off. But having Invisible Freddy fight the kung fu kid, it lacks something, some creativity, some imagination. As weird as this movie is, the constant trips to the cemetery is something that's somewhat sombering. And as whatever as I am about this movie, that notion is super interesting. It's a thing that you just don't see in these movies. It throws death in your face. And that never has been seen before now, seemingly. Also, a Big Bopper reference, a song from the 50s. I love it in the hello, baby. Like, how many people are going to pick up on a Chantilly Lace reference? I love it, but I don't know who they thought their audience was. Also, I'm sure I've talked about the Chekhov gun principle before. The thought is if you see a weapon, it's probably going to be used, not having things uselessly in your frame. But for reference to that, it's if you see a gun, most likely it's going to be used at some point. But in this movie, there's a pair of nunchucks being used surprisingly well. And when those are not used in the final fight, pretty pissed off, and it's a bad look to end this movie. I mean, I constantly was asking myself the biggest question. What's going on in this movie? Is there a plot? It just goes from kill to kill with seemingly, no rhyme or reason or relation to films 1, 2, and 3. It's a loose connection at best, but I guess it's somehow based on the house that he lived in again. Like, one thing this movie does amazing, the full soundtrack of 80s cheese, lovely. But this is a weird movie, and look, I like weird, but this is goofy, bad, and maybe too weird. I don't know if I hate this movie, but I definitely don't care or like it. Every time Freddy dies in this franchise, it's like dumb. He seems unstoppable, but this time he looks in a mirror and all the souls mess him up. No nunchucks in sight. Oh boy, we are diving into the garbage. Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, last movie to take place in the 80s. Maybe it's a fact that I don't care for any of the new cast in the fourth film. But no disrespect to Lisa Wilcox. I am not all about the new franchise lead in Alice. For some reason, the later Nightmare movies wean more deeply into nudity and trying to sex appeal stuff, which doesn't really work when your lead is a loud personality, but majorly gross. And overall, compared to Halloween and Friday the 13th, this is a way grosser film franchise. Also, this is the final of 5 films all coming out in that same year. This was the coming out party for Freddy Krueger in the 80s, and I would also have to argue the harsh drop-off in quality. We introduced Freddy's mom as that ghost nun lady in the third one, but none of the characters existing in this movie had any relation to that ghostly visage, so it's a bit jarring to throw that as a major plot point for our new lead character this late into the franchise. The whole mother thing has been played out in both Nightmare, to mixed degrees of success, and it's the cornerstone of Friday the 13th. By the 5th film, you can't always go forward. So trying to explain where Freddy went bad, and I guess the thought now is maybe he was a weird-looking dude beforehand and being born a vile prison life, and it made him the monster he was overall. But seemingly that whole thing was no one knew he was a killer to begin with, and he was just some random guy until they lit him up, literally. But the notion of just kind of dreaming about him makes him a thing. I guess it's just like a worse version of Candyman, which is an urban legend with no real explanation, but it is just scary overall. Trying to explain Freddy and doing it badly makes me long for the first and third movie, and the second to a lesser degree. When Freddy does, I guess inevitably, come back after being mirrored to death, like, I've grown tired with his stupid bad jokes. We may have learned a bit more about our group last movie. Probably the best part of the not good fourth movie was the teen intros, but this super sped by the brief intros. One guy's a quirky comic guy who's a bit of a Joker party guy, but that's about it. I kind of like this nice jock kid, Dan Jordan, played by an actor who's pretty much known for his time in this franchise, which is never a good sign. But like, with how few people die in this movie, at just 3 to 4, if you count Freddy, his death in the beginning is unfortunate for any hope at anything of a connective thread in this franchise. This movie also, and not in a clever way, plays this game of if anyone is awake or not. The story, a third of the way through, is a non-stop nonsense amount of things happening, and there's no clue of if anyone is ever asleep or not until the very end, as Freddy can just do whatever he wants all the time. And his cool dream stalking in the first 3 is him turning into weird things, objects, creatures. It's just not making sense, and it never will seemingly ever again. What happened here? And at this point, like, I'm happy I didn't start my slasher story personally with this nonsense. When a guy becomes a half motorcycle robot skeleton and it's not a Terminator, then you got green screen portals popping up, like, you gotta just wonder what is going on. And even following that, there's this disgusting force feeding someone to death, and the weird Freddy in like costumes, dress up moments, and awful horrid CGI, and Freddy's continued terrible one-liner of just adding bitch to the end of things. I did not think there could be a worse Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but of course this franchise has continued to disappoint me 5 movies in. I'll say one thing that made me smile, having a 4 years later, for a hot second, drawing a guy into a scene, and this kind of like aha Take On Me music video style. That did something for me in an otherwise disappointing movie. Especially as they keep getting Freddy to do dumb things, like being on a skateboard for some reason. I get it, Tony Hawk was all the rage. But the fact of the medias that try to capitalize on skateboarding, it normally just looks terrible. And it is almost a disservice. It's no rocket power, if you ask me. But there is something neat about Freddy making dumb superhero references, and if nothing else, the neat visuals of Freddy cutting up a Paper Mario version of this comic book nerd, and the colors of him pooling out on the floor like blood, that was kind of neat. Like, besides being overtly terrible as a main chunk of this movie, it retreads a lot of story and scene moments from previous things in the franchise. I pretty much watched this whole movie wondering what the fuck is going on, because I was baffled. There's a part of this that is like the Penrose Stair illusion mixed with Scooby-Doo chases. At this point in time, it seemed like only 3 movies were good and 3 movies were just bad, including that crossover. I just wonder how anyone could pick this franchise out of a hat and say, oh, if I had to tell my slasher franchise, it's always going to be this one. Like, the end has a young kid like Freddy throwing up on Freddy himself while 3 heads are breaking away from him, while his nun ghost mom watches on, pulling rubbery Freddy baby out of his striped shirt, and the nun mom ghost absorbs him, and I guess the ghost kid gets sucked back into Alice, and both are never to be seen again in film. And I guess this kid is normal now, TBD. And it wouldn't end the weirdness without a vintage 80s hip-hop song for no reason during the credits. Like, the song is awesome, but it, like this movie, made absolutely no sense. So, before the 6th of these, The Final Nightmare, first into the 90s, seemingly this was going to be the end of the franchise story. The next 3 movies take place outside of this, and the movie poster says, they saved the best for last. I doubted that. I really doubted that. it would be better than the first 3 movies. With how bad the last 2 were, I was never going to hold my breath. But the Nightmare franchise did finally take that step into the 90s, and it started with some laughable oddness of every kid being dead now from one specific region in Ohio, maybe 10 years in the future, which feels super predicated on Freddy getting really good all of a sudden of killing people and somehow coming back from death from his mother's absorption or something. So now you not only need to avoid being anywhere near Elm Street or try not to be related to that mob who burned him in the first place, but now you just gotta avoid that whole town? There is a fun Wizard of Oz reference early on. The pop culture nature is not lost on me, but I think I'm just, drained from this franchise, especially 6 movies in, especially with those last 2. It's seeing a green screen witch Freddy on a broom immediately, it's a bit exhausting. They also gave Freddy some limits, weirdly enough, of being stuck in this one town. Obviously, this is not true in the crossover or the future, but to start, at least he's stuck here. I'll also say one more actor thing. The late Yaphet Kotto, who passed this year, was awesome as the big bad in Live and Let Die, one of the more absurd, fun, and gator-filled Roger Moore Bond movies. Thankfully, they started making these movies more an hour 30 instead of 2. I just don't think they'd have enough to keep any of these movies any longer than that, and they're rough to begin with, but that much longer would be painful. There is a fun notion of the whole town being under Freddy's spell and the whole anti-Children of the Corn spooky setting. This movie is goofy and dumb, but somehow it feels better than some of those Dream Master and Baby movies. Q-tipping a kid through both ears looks dumb, but these fears, they make sense. And Freddy is quirky and dumb, but it feels less irksome somehow, even though Freddy's first kill leads to nails on a chalkboard screeching until this guy's head blows up. This franchise doesn't really have any stoner archetypes. That is clearly more reserved for Friday the 13th, with the classic being Mitch. Drug use runs rampant through that franchise, but having a stoner leads to somehow them getting Johnny Depp to come back to this franchise. This movie came out a year after Edward Scissorhands and the end of his TV jump to mainstay name brandness in 21 Jump Street. The stoner video game angle, honestly, this movie is the right kind of dumb. There's no world where this was a good movie, but I was having a blast. And the Power Glove reference in this, hilarious video game moments. It's like Jason Goes to Space or Rides on a Boat. This movie can be summed up as just fun. And while I don't look to this franchise for amazing storytelling, overall there is a fun plot twist of seemingly Freddy having a son and the movie lying to us, instead making it a daughter. Fun plot twist. Although the idea of Freddy, like Michael before him, having a kid just sounds ludicrous. I mean, look, Palpatine having a kid sounded ludicrous. But as far as depth with our killer and an interesting origin story, it's pretty neat and not terribly done. The more I watch these movies, following with Freddy using his catchphrase, the more I know I need to rewatch that early Rick and Morty Scary Terry episode. I know I will appreciate it more now. There's something fun about throwing a Dream Expert in here as well. But while this is good and fun, it's for sure a lesser version of Dream Warriors. There is a lot of Freddy backstory in this movie. It's not as much as maybe 2 movies that come down the pike later on. I mean, it's nice to finally see some look at Freddy being burned by the mob. And this is shown in Freddy vs. Jason and the remake in 2010. But seeing it in one of the original story source materials is nice. There's a little inconsistency in Freddy having some dream powers. He doesn't have all of them, but it is a little strange. And it's not all doom and gloom. There's something fun about Freddy being assaulted with ninja stars, a crossbow, his own glove, and to end it with getting a pipe bomb stuck in him. Icing on the cake. That and some incredibly awful CGI, which will always be a staple of this franchise. Like, late in the game, I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this movie, especially with the L's this franchise was eating for breakfast. Going to a movie especially titled Wes Craven's New Nightmare, preemptively I was super excited for the description being a more meta version of A Nightmare on Elm Street from the same person who brought us Scream. That alone is excitement, and having Heather Langenkamp and John Saxon reprise their roles, albeit this time as actors who played the fictitious story version, and having Wes Craven play Wes Craven in his own movie world, the meta fan is meta excited as all get up for this tale. Immediately I was having a blast here. From shooting a set of a nightmare movie to having a metal claw come alive, killing people not in the movie, to it all being a dream. Which does eventually happen later on in the movie, which is a really fun twist. And while Nancy, our OG final girl, is not back in character, it's a lovely reunion for the actress Langenkamp to be back into the franchise playing a fictitious version of her actor self. Just for meta references, Scream would not come out for 2 more years, the staple of this niche genre and my favorite of Wes Craven's creations. Although Vampire in Brooklyn is pretty fun as a watch yourself with Eddie Murphy. Also, fun Scream fact, one of the earliest introduced characters in this movie has Scream TV actress and mom of our final girl there in Maggie Duvall, played by Tracy Mittendorf. This was one of her earliest movie roles. Also seeing Robert Englund as both a yucking it up Freddy actor and the real actor version too. It reminds me of the best parts of Scream 3 with that setting of a studio backlot. While the mother-son story is fine and different in this franchise, I don't know how about another scary kid in a movie is. Although Miko Hughes was in a fair amount of spooky movies as a child actor. There really aren't a whole lot of depth in this movie, but overall, while the setup for this is probably one of the zanier, honestly, it's just about as much fun as it sounds. The death, the real world ones, are muted and kind of scary. The tension is high, and just in general, the scares are pretty strong. If there's one thing I'm pretty not into here, though, it's this weird obsession of using earthquakes all the time as a plot device. I don't get it. I don't like it. I don't feel like this being a tease to anything with Freddy. I guess I thought initially it was maybe an earthquake, him coming back from the ground, his own hellscape thing, but really it never is addressed as anything other than just earthquakes existing for the sake of them being there. Mad annoying. I know I said already, but giving Robert Englund and John Saxon more than just cameos, seeing the real life horror that is seemingly going to be payback from the movie representations they were in, even though neither of them really get their comeuppance. You think Robert Englund would get his comeuppance in the fictitious version of this story. They are haunted by it, which is fine, and I get those similar vibes from Scream 3. Obviously, they're scarier here. Freddy, especially this version that keeps being teased, is quite good. I kind of wish Freddy hunted more actors from the franchise in this movie. Like seeing Robert Englund, killing Robert Englund, that would have been sensational. And it takes a while to get our first real look at Freddy. He looks pretty good. He's overall scarier and definitely better than the, you would think, scariest 2010 version. I mean, I did not have high expectations for that movie at all. Also, any scary scenes with vomit stuff, classic Exorcist, not about it. Scares are good. No one needs projectile bodily fluid things in any version of any movie. It's not something people want or need, as far as I'm concerned. You can tell, though, Wes Craven put his own mark on this movie, not just being in the movie himself, but there's a clear difference between 1, 2, and 7, even though I do have an appreciation for 3 and 6. Clear difference. About 2/3 into this movie, besides having a fun callback of Nancy, the actor, getting the white hair streak from the first movie, like seeing Julie kick butt fighting a nurse, followed by the quote, "Oh, hey, you can't do that." Something about that just makes you chuckle. Also, Freddy in the trench coat, just how they did the makeup for his eyes. It looks so good. And the new claw look, it's menacing and scary. And the kill here is actually kind of reminiscent of the first movie kill of dragging someone up the walls and having them bleeding all over the place. This time we get to see Freddy doing it and playing with gravity, bouncing all off the walls, and having random nurses see a floating bleeding girl. The chaos is pretty good here. I mean, even after the hospital, minus some bad special effects, which this franchise is unfortunately known for. The frantic tension of hundreds of Freddys just existing, which we never see again, but it's a scary moment just existing in the world. There's some wild car stunt scenes, and honestly, the visuals of Freddy being acted like the old movie storyline, that is a nostalgia blast that brings the scares you have come to expect from the first movie in the franchise. But those moments were taken out clearly of the following 4 or 5 movies or so. Even making her house become the house from Elm Street, the old one. The dream or not dream final conflict here. Like, I was pretty excited for this one, and I hadn't been excited for one of these in ages. And look, I like the 6th one of these. But knowing there was and is a clear difference between Scary Freddy and Goofy Fun Freddy, and the scary one is without a doubt better here. And it gives Robert Englund the chance to be scary in the role instead of a dancing spooky clown. Until, of course, the end of this movie. I've spoken a ton of praise overall of this take and this entry in the series, but the end is disappointing. A ton of garbage CGI was saved for the very end of this movie. You got buildings blowing up. Freddy's hell looks terrible. He has stretchy arms again, and he's doing super weird tongue things. He's like a cartoon that blows up, and the end is just like bad. And while, trapping the evil in a script is kind of neat, it's also a bit cheesy. Overall, I like this movie, especially early on. But there is some bad that is thrown in the bulk of it at the end. And that drops this down a ton for me. Maybe this is just a realization that no matter what, I will not be about the character of Freddy. Some of these movies are good enough to keep me going, but I'm clearly a ride or die Halloween and Friday the 13th guy, which gets me to the next movie here. We've already talked about Freddy vs. Jason. There's an episode all about the Friday the 13th series. It's the worst Jason. Honestly, this Freddy, at the time, seemed like the worst one I was ever going to see. But now that I've seen a bunch of these movies, while it's not the worst, it's really not good here either. This movie just sends people flying all over the place, getting hit by any sort of object. Some of the weird dream things, jokes are just stupid. This movie is stupid. They have the animal smoking pot Freddy things in here. It just makes no sense. I will continue to think badly of this movie forever. Versus movies overall are pretty stupid. Alien vs. Predator, and there are 2 of those. They're both rough. Godzilla vs. Kong wasn't good, but it wasn't terrible either. This is not the case here. I somehow cared for the character development of Kong more than any player in the other 3 verse movies I can think of. I do think Batman vs. Superman, the extended cut, is good. Is it amazing? No, but it's good enough to get me through it, especially with the extended cut context, which we've definitely talked about before. But I mostly hate the Freddy vs. Jason movie for what it did to Jason, and probably because I like that style of movie over this one that has been thrown on us. I saved the longest tirade for the end, apparently. The remake from 2010, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't want to talk about cast here to kick off this episode. It really is its own separate thing compared to the rest of the franchise. And yeah, I for sure know some of these actors. The big bad is Watchmen and Preacher and Human Target actor Jackie Earle Haley, among many other things. He's pretty good at being the bad guy. The final girl is recast as Rooney Mara. This is the 4th CW actor that I can think of who joins a horror remake. Jared Padalecki, Jensen Ackles, Daniel Panabaker are joined by Arrowverse alum Katie Cassidy in this one for another CW horror actor. And just having Clancy Brown, the voice of a legend in Mr. Krabs, who will soon go toe-to-toe with Dexter in the latest Showtime miniseries revival. He just fits into the horror genre. I mean, he's not used well here, because this is less of a whodunit. They, for a moment, make you think it could be, but it's not. He's definitely not the killer. I guess you could say, is he to blame, which we'll get to. Also, AHS Murder House leading lady Connie Britton is in this. Fingers crossed she will come back to the franchise one of these days. So modern day horror. Friday the 13th was okay at best. Halloween is seemingly, with the first one, off to a great start. The assumption is, as this is another one-off remake, the end product, not up to par. Spoiler alert, it was not, but let's discover why together. The one thing I will say overall, especially deep into this franchise, is Freddy, like every killer, is hunting teens, rarely adults. But it will never not be weird to know his character, is known for killing young kids. And in this entire franchise, he pretty much only went after one unborn kid once, and to be that kid, not to kill that kid. And then he chased a kid around for no real reason in Freddy's Nightmare. Seemingly, that imagery and horror of him killing kids is all over this franchise. But I guess being a dream demon, he changed up that MO. That's never really explained. It's a little different here. They make it not killing, but like abuse of kids and then getting revenge, which does mix it up. I'll give him that. Also, one more fun actor thing. John Connor from the Terminator TV show, Thomas Dekker, he's in this. How about that? So no matter what, this version of Freddy will always be without a doubt seemingly just Rorschach in look and voice. Dark, growling, brooding voice, Jackie Earle Haley. There's only so many ways he can do it. It's what it is. Off the bat, the first kill is shot with some brutal light flashes and jump cuts. The kills are more gory here, for sure. And look, they're going to look better because of technology. But I don't know if I care for this full trying to be hardcore scary version of the character. I don't know if it's possible after so many movies for me to surrender to this super edgy, gory Freddy. I also get absolutely nothing throughout the movie. I thought it would have got better. It didn't for Rooney Mara here. Nancy was likable and all that from the first movie, but somehow it feels like they made the character here just more brooding and a loner. Not a huge fan of this change. This movie is hugely into jump scares, which is, I guess, fine. Jumpy Nick doesn't always appreciate it, but not even doing the jumping, just having the jump scares in there. And I didn't even react sometimes because I just kind of knew what was happening. It's always going to be a staple of the horror slasher genre. But going to that from what we had in the franchise before, it's just a bit more generic. Honestly, this movie is made to look and be scarier, but I will always take that first movie any day. Even the last Wes Craven one did better, even if it was botched in the end. It looks the part, but I can already tell you, early on, you can tell something is missing here. I'm not saying I love Goofy Freddy, but ungoofy Freddy doesn't feel right either. There has to be some balance, and as much as I feel like this character will never be it for me, this modern retelling is not doing anyone any favors. Halloween at least did something as a soft reboot that still honors the original, starting over from the beginning with computers and cell phones. This isn't really doing anything, especially with burying Nancy through the first third of this movie. Your final girl really has to be present in a real way. I love how much screen time Laura Lance. Sorry, the CW superhero fan in me will always think of her that way. Just being in this movie for 30 minutes, she's a huge part of the beginning. I'm sure I've said this before about the franchise. Sometimes feels like the plot is just bouncing around from one kill to another. In short, there is no plot. Speaking of bouncing around, that is what they did to Laura Lance here. So much of this movie is identical to the first one. And that's not good, because I would just choose to watch the first one. So should you. To kill her, to quote 18s, upside down, bouncing off the ceiling. It somehow looks worse here. How the modern version is less scary or interesting than the first one, beyond me. Jump scares and realistic blood do not make for a good movie. And the way kills happened, and the use of Nancy in the originals, it blows this out of the water. But this remake does one good thing here. At least the sound of knives on metal, it sounds, well, what it's supposed to sound like. This franchise does have some good kills, and the creepiness grows on you a little bit. Seeing Freddy after the third kill, still in the dream space with his recent victim, that line of the brain still functioning 6 minutes after death and still having 6 more minutes to play, that line and moment was pretty badass. And the idea of childhood trauma is neat. And actually, like I said before, this movie is the first that Freddy is hunting down every kid from this preschool, just doing the hunting later on in life. So it does make sense in the story it's weaving, which is a good idea. But even that backstory of having the gardener live in the basement of a preschool, like, come on, that sounds suspicious the moment you hear about it. I will say this is the most flushed out version of seeing all these people take on some mob justice to Fred Krueger in the entire franchise. Even though it's a stunted view from his perspective, seeing the fire burning is pretty wild. For a moment, they try to make him sympathetic. For a split second, they give you this crazy notion. Imagine how much more fun it would have been to actually make him innocent and somehow make Clancy Brown the villainous voice you love to hear and be scared of, making him either responsible for the abuse or just making him to blame for making the murder Nightmare Man out of spite and getting your revenge on all these kids for being wrongly accused. Honestly, that sounds pretty interesting. But this isn't overall the grand issue with this remake. This takes on chances that it could reinvent the franchise. And instead, it drums up the exact same story beats more often than not. I'm actively annoyed at this movie for the retreads. It's so close to being a bit better than the worst of the franchise. But gosh, it's such a whatever movie most of the time. There's a lot of everything is good here, but when I talk about this movie, there's some really neat duality moments of the dream world versus the real world, and the switching back and forth scene, especially in the drugstore, with light switching and him moving forward and things being knocked over in the real world, cutting so quick between those two, waning between being awake and sleeping. It's a really unique idea, but the dream world looks super generic and boring. It's the same throughout the entire movie, and honestly, the dream world should be a bit exciting or at least a little varied. Also, the hardcore nature of drug taking to stay awake, it feels a bit more realistic compared to magic awake pills that people can always access. But the drug usage to stay awake feels a bit too omnipresent with the whole adrenaline needle and just everything there. The whole drugs being an extension of sin rule, it clearly doesn't fly here. I kind of miss those classic rules. Hopefully Scream 5 has a modern but respectful stance to the first rules from that 1996 film. Yo, as a callback to the fourth movie, had to be intentional. Freddy once again made an awkward wet dream joke. It was way better with a waterbed. It wasn't good either way, but funnier with a waterbed. Also, this movie, especially the later parts that made Freddy aggressively sexual and uncomfortable, and I don't know who would want to watch this movie. It's beyond me who would be overjoyed with this franchise and this, I don't know. It always just doesn't make sense to me. And like they always made Freddy a little bit sexual as like the franchise went on, and it was always bad, but it's even worse here. It's unsettling, and like I feel like this kind of proves that this franchise will never really work in modern times. It will always lean towards being darker and gritty, and like this franchise should just die for real this time. Halloween can be the lone oldie slasher flick that made the jump to the 2020s, although I'd love to see a new modern Friday the 13th that builds on something, maybe with the old Tommy Jarvis. I don't know. I can dream, can't I? Also, the one weird thing, Freddy pretty much only kills teens, and before the movie he kills some younger kids. That's the overall franchise. As far as I can tell, he pretty much only ever killed one adult, the mom in the first movie and the mom here. In this final moment of this pretty bad movie, the final scare, while fun for a time seeing Freddy in the mirror reflection on like a double take, killing Nancy's mom at the very end for no real reason, it's a waste. Just like this movie was a waste for Clancy Brown, and honestly a waste for me. Now that we finally got through this though, let's do a list. This is, the start of this list is like, what's the best of the worst movies? Number 9, I gave it a Dream Child. That movie was painfully bad, stupid, and nothing happened of consequence throughout the movie. Number 8, Part 4, The Dream Master. It took what made 3 nice and said, nope, let's get rid of this. No leading final girl in sight from the first movie. Recast of the new final girl. They fly through things just to get through kill to kill to kill with no real discernible plot. Karate Kid was fun, but that's about it. Number 7, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2010. Could have done some unique fun ideas, had a few cool, scary, dark moments, but overall this movie doubles down on repetitive nature and just isn't good or fun. And if you're going to watch this movie, why not just not do that and watch the first real movie from 1984? It's way better and does 10 times the work that A Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 does. Could it have made some fun diversion changes? Said, nah, let's just do the same thing, but look a little better. Number 6, surprised that it's this high up the list, Freddy vs. Jason. I hated this movie when I first watched it. Still don't like it. It does awful things to Jason, but surprisingly, there's some way worse Nightmare on Elm Street solo movies. Number 5, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. This isn't a good movie. This is like a Sharknado movie. But, unlike the 3 under it, it's a funny watch. The video game references are hilarious. There's some neat ideas in here. It's a dumb movie, but you could easily watch this movie for the dumb fun and turn your brain off and enjoy it for a little bit. You do not need to rewatch this movie, but you could watch it once and get a few good laughs out of it. Number 4, it was real close between number 4 and 3, between A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Really tough to get between the two. I decided I was really impressed with a lot of Wes Craven's A New Nightmare. As much as I did not enjoy the end, I think overall the body of work, including the story of Nancy, Wes Craven's Nightmare had to go where it was. Overall, I enjoy the secondary lead in Jesse, but as a character who's never touched on again in the franchise, especially when I really think they could have found a way to use that character in Dream Warrior, pretty disappointed by its long-standing nature. I think the end of this movie is pretty good. I just didn't care as much for Freddy taking over a person as opposed to the thing that kind of tried and true of the formula. Down to the top 2, either A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984 or A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warrior. It was really close. I think there's a clear tier system with some really bad, some okay, and a few that are pretty good for a really bad franchise. I controversially decided to go Dream Warriors 1, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and here's why. I really enjoyed the first Nightmare on Elm Street. The scares were quite good. The character of Freddy was probably the best we got from a serious, scary standpoint. But I really liked the dream logic analysis from 3. I liked the whole concept of trying to weaponize your dreams based on the Inception thing. I think this was an awesome, seemingly send-off for Langenkamp as our titular lead. So while really close, I think Dream Warriors just has a little more going for it for what I was looking for. But I could easily see people flipping the script and going Nightmare 1, Dream 2. That's just what I have it as. By the end of this whole episode, biggest thing I've learned, somehow this franchise had worse movies compared to Freddy vs. Jason's. By no means do I like that movie, but somehow 3 movies in the franchise alone are worse comparatively. Huge surprise. I can't say I was a big fan of the franchise, even going into it, just the idea and concept. And while some movies really did something for me, 1 to 3, The Craven, even Freddy's Dead, as silly as it was, all either made me laugh or have some good scares. And that is important, followed by good storytelling. The bad storytelling, improper balance of scares and dumb stuff, and just overall, that's where the negatives of this franchise goes. I don't recommend it overall, especially as a body of its whole sum of individual works. But you can for sure watch the first 3 and the Craven remake, but you can kind of stop there, and I really don't think I will find myself rewatching this franchise again. If I want dream movies, I can do Inception. And I have 2 separate slasher franchises that, while not always good, I can get my fix in that way. And soon enough, there'll be a new Halloween and Scream movie to look forward to. So that's the episode. Till next time, cinephiles. Are you not entertained? I think this is gonna be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, alligator.